Gang.
All right, buddy.
And we're live.
So it turns out we're podcast superstars because we have 25 play.
25? Oh, bumped up to 25? We're gangsters, buddy. We're gangsters.
Yeah, no.
You know, something that I was thinking about today that was like, because, you know, trying to analyze, feeling off and stuff like that, just like whatever wasn't lining up, you know, thank you.
Because you know, off air or off the podcast, or you're talking about being off today. Just having an off day.
Yeah, for prefacing, thank you. Just feeling off, and I was trying to like dig through the garbage in my head, trying to figure out what was going on and stuff like that. And I was like, maybe it's hormones, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But regardless, it's like, how does one figure out a really effective and optimal way to be able to operate within that feeling, you know? And that's what I was trying to bang through today. Is it like tuck your head down and just deal with it and bear the storm, or try to figure out a solution that you can apply immediately? But it's like, I don't know, I feel like there's factors that affect that back and forth, you know what I mean?
Man, I really don't have that one cracked. I can tell you I can operate, but what I can't do is think. Because,
Right.
man, you know, there's rose-colored glasses, but there's also shit-colored glasses. And once my blood sugar
Are you fucking with
or
this
my...
at all?
Yeah.
Sure.
Once I'm fucked up enough in terms of blood sugar, having a bad day, whatever, just down in a rotten enough hole, I just have a negative overlay on everything I think about. Even if I think I'm seeing it clearly, in retrospect, I almost always look back at my line of thinking when I was in a shitty mood and be like, oh, wow, yeah, like you were kind of getting... Like, you weren't being fair. Like, you thought you were being fair in your assessment of things. But there was clearly another factor. You know what I mean? Like, and how are you supposed to... I mean, me, myself, when I'm feeling shitty, I'm just more prone to, like, impulse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just, like, it feels good to be mad right now, so I'm mad.
And it's just bubbling under the surface. Well, and this brought up another thing in my head, too, is like something you and I had discussed before, where it's like being in love with that misery. You know what I mean? And that was something that I started feeling like start bubbling up a little bit today as well, where I was like, oh, I feel big sad boy. Like, I feel a sad boy face coming through right now. And I don't know if I should just like lean into it and get it over with quick, or if I should be like, don't drink, don't do nothing except lift weights and get it out that way. You know what I mean? Kind of like on a Peterson thing of like, don't keep doing the things that are making you weak.
Yeah, well, in my experience, I've found that when you don't lean into it, it does tend to pass faster, but I've also had times where it's like, it doesn't really matter what I do. And I can wear it badly or I can wear it well, but it like has to go through its thing. But to go back to like what I was saying, that nope, totally lost my train of thought. Happens.
It's boarding at the station.
Yeah,
Totally
yeah.
happens. But yeah, man, it was just an interesting thing. It was like, I'm sure maybe there's a hormonal thing going on or something like that that's affecting me or whatnot. But it was just, I don't know. It was thought-provoking, at least. I could say that. It was thought-provoking.
Okay, now I know what I was going to say. Apologies. Was that I now since I've gotten older, I'm just like, it's just too, I'm just unable to lie to myself about where that road leads, you know what I mean? Like, if I feel sad or anything, it's like, sure, yeah, like taking too many drinks is going to make me feel better for like an hour.
Right.
But then I have to come back to my brain in that same condition, now pissy because I just ran a bunch of alcohol through my body.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, that happens every time. Like, and there was like 10 years when I could lie to myself and be like, it's going to go different this time, or
have
whatever.
this drink, you'll feel better.
But now it's just so like iron for me that I can be like, because I had a dumpy moment like a week ago, like 2 weeks ago, where I was upset, I was crying, I was fighting with my girlfriend, all that good stuff, and I just wanted to like go like, you know, drink for like 2 days straight or something.
Yep.
Binge drink or just do terrible things in that vein of just basically self-destruction and bad coping mechanisms. And I was just like, dude, you just know that that's not going to fucking help this situation. Now, did I drink? Yes. But did I drink for 2 days? No. I capped it off, you know, 3 drinks or something, and maybe I'd have been better off not having done that, but it certainly wasn't drinking for 2 days, so I count it as a W.
I count it as a dubs. And yeah, man, is like not going as far as you like, especially having been in that equation before, so gone down that road so many times. Mic check. Gone down that road so many times and been down that road before is like, you know how that's going to result. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have a very strong idea of the different directions that those actions will take.
Well, I think, if you're not lying to yourself. I was talking
Right.
to Wyatt earlier today, and I stumbled on something that I thought was interesting. As I get older, like, the sequence of events becomes clearer. You know the world more, or at least you have more experience in it. Let's say that, right?
Yeah.
And it seems as you get older, either you have to get better at lying to yourself, like, continuously,
Yeah.
or you have to face the truth at some point or another. You know what I mean? And that's like, as terrifying as the truth is to me, living a complete delusion of a life is like, might be one of my top fears.
Dude, well, it's yeah, absolutely, living a life of delusion, and then but you also see it all the time, like people in
Agreed.
detrimental health that can do something about it that choose not to. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to get too specific for
Well, there's a
various
lot.
reasons,
Look, there's
but-
a lot of cases I could apply to. That's a general
Right.
enough case.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, but they like, and I've even done this myself. You know what I mean? Where I was like, oh, if I could just do this, I'd be in better shape, or man, I wish I had better genetics, or something like that, right? Well,
Yeah.
it's like, no, you gotta stop lying to yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotta stop lying to yourself and actually do
Well,
something.
and to
about
be
it.
clear, dude, nobody is free from self-delusion. You know what I mean?
No.
It's just the scale at which you're practicing. You know what I mean? Like, we
Right.
all have blind spots. You know?
Absolutely.
I'm under no illusion that there's like some mountaintop to get to where you're completely free of self-delusion. The issue is that I simply, when I recognize that fork in the road, subconsciously or otherwise, to delude myself or to face the music, I really am trying to lean towards facing the music, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like even though it's like scarier to do so, to try to face the music or at least make steps in that direction, I don't know. It seems like victimization to go the other way. Is you're going to victimize yourself by trying to run away from it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And you're going to let this little thing
But I
start
think-
seeding in your dome and
But I-
acting as if it rules your shit.
That's how it manifests, no question, as a victim thing. But I think there's this allure to it that's more like, that goes more along the lines of, and I'll put it like in drug terms, that it's like, yeah, I know this fucks everybody else open, but maybe fucks everybody else up, but maybe if I'm good enough at it, I will be the exception. And like, you know what I mean? And I feel like almost at the root of serial delusion or lying is like, if I lie hard enough and with enough earnestness and for long enough, it becomes the truth. You know what I mean?
That's
I feel,
spicy because, like,
I-
recontextualize that into something positive. Instead of, like, addiction or something like that, what is like, oh, I am the best at this
Well,
thing, at X. And
that-
if I lie to myself long enough and I stay on this path and dedicate and believe that this lie is true, then eventually it'll happen.
Well, that brings up an interesting point in that perhaps there are types of self-delusion that are actually useful, nay, possibly even necessary. Right? Like, you
Yeah.
could, like, with the whole imposter syndrome thing, are you familiar with that to some extent?
I
Or the
mean-
concept of it? Yeah, okay. All right. But it's
as
like-
as a yes.
But the cure, you know, in theory or whatever, in practice to that is, you just have to go through you have to delude yourself in a sense that you're not. You know what I mean? Which imposter syndrome is real, especially early on, because it's like you haven't done the thing and you're just acting the thing. You're like playing house to
Right.
some extent.
Right.
You know, but then at some point, at some unbeknownst point, you cross over into legitimacy. You know, it's like,
Do you think that's after an amount of experience?
I think it's certainly an amount of experience.
That's at least a big factor.
Right, but the key concept is that everybody sees the man with experience in the master and is like, that's what it is to do that thing, and you're like, no, that's what it is to be good at that thing. Okay, to do that thing is a bunch of ugly fucking horse shit and doubting yourself and wondering if you belong at all, ever, at all times, and just being terrified of that the world's going to tell you you're a fucking idiot for whatever you put out. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's that guy who just, or person, whatever, who just keeps fucking going, that eventually becomes the master, and then that's all you ever see.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's so paralyzing. So like, I like talking about imposter syndrome from the aspect of like good, like Like, do you, like, I really, really think about it. It's not like Stephen King first put pen to paper, like the very first time he was going to write a story, and was like, guess who's about to become a fucking 4-decade multi-billionaire? You know what I mean? You think that's really what was in his dome? Because I highly can doubt it, man.
I would highly doubt that too. Well, it's like you're not, and I see this come across like various social medias relatively frequently, but you're not going to be a G out the gate. You're not gonna have a newborn baby that can suddenly flat top roof a house.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was like you gotta suck until you're awesome, and like you said, it's ugly, and even like we mentioned before in the last one, is like it's to have that moment on top of the mountain with the sword and everything like that. The Conan moment, I guess, for reference, is like you have to go through the bog. You have to slay through the forest. You have to do all that ugly, boring, mundane ass shit before you get to be the hero.
Well, and I think people have always struggled with that, and that's always been the path to, like, the hero path has always been something in human culture for thousands of years and civilization, and we've always struggled with having to undertake that hard thing. But I think now we have a shitload of stuff working against us in terms of the technology and the super, super short attention spans, because one thing I've noticed, they're just little talking point. One thing I've noticed is that people no longer have to endure discomfort. They look like discomfort in any form, almost, like, with smaller exceptions. There's just less and less discomfort. If you are bored, if you have anxiety, if you're in a situation you don't like, boom, you've got a fucking universe in your pocket. You just open it up, and you can at least distract yourself from actively being uncomfortable. Maybe you're not happy, maybe you're not even engaged, but you're not actively uncomfortable. And so to me, it's almost like it's repetition. It's like weightlifting or anything like that. If you're not practicing being uncomfortable at all and don't have much exposure to it, when it does happen, you're poorly equipped for it.
Train hard, fight easy.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to, like, stonily add like 50 other weird things to it, it's like we're in this super crazy environment, dystopian environment, where it doesn't really seem like how people are valued in society is necessarily tied to their actual value or contribution or worth. So I think people end up, I myself, maybe erroneously, maybe I'm the only one, make this disconnect between, it's just like, well, it doesn't matter who tries and who doesn't, because there are 8-year-olds making fucking $100 million on YouTube right now. You know what I mean? And there are brilliant musicians I know slaving away, paying to play gigs that nobody could care less about. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like, so 2 points on that one is, fame is fickle. Right? And like what people are paying attention to is ebbing and flowing all of the time. Sometimes your iron's hot, sometimes it's not. You know what I mean? Like, for a great example, look at record companies. They're non-existent. You know what I mean? If they are existent at all, they're a dying fucking breed because there's no need for that middleman anymore. But back to the discomfort thing that you had mentioned earlier is like, I feel like part of that is like almost in our DNA. To make things easier, to make things more efficient, to make us be able to survive easier, so that we have to, like, I feel like that's a dedicated part of our programming and stuff like that, is to try to do things as efficiently as possible so that we don't have to spend as much energy, that we don't have to have as much resources because we're doing things more efficiently.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, that's has to be the case because we only have so many resources, right?
Exactly.
And that's a different interesting thing I often think about what's going on right now is the hugely scaled complexity of the interconnected world. And like you said, we constantly have to look at bring things down to a more base level so that we can comprehend them, because we can't be thinking super deep about everything in our lives. Like, I can't be like, all right, this turkey sandwich, like, okay, what degree do I want the fucking the meat at? And then, like, how much cheese? No, not that kind of. I gotta go get cheese now. Like, you see how, like, what I'm talking about, the slippery slope is just like you could infinitely focus on almost anything, right? And so we kind of rank order things by how important is it, how relevant is it to my life right now, right? But the problem becomes is that all this global level shit, at least seemingly, is becoming relevant to us. And yet, we are still living the life where we have to go to work every day, we have to eat, we have all these other things taking up our mental capital, so that when we run across information about the world at large, and these big things that we're supposed to have an opinion on or whatever, we're still in that mode of, like, trying to make it simple, trying to make it a simple decision. Like this turkey sandwich. What kind of cheese do you want? Cheddar or Swiss? Swiss. Fuck it. Done. You know what I'm saying?
Wrapped up.
Like,
Not married
but
to the
what
idea.
happens if the answer is like, well, the Swiss, like you need like 10 minutes of backstory on the Swiss and 10 minutes of backstory on the cheddar, and that's lightly to even have an opinion politically, or like on, not even necessarily politically, just on something global that's not in your direct experience, i.e.
Right.
you're consuming it third party.
Right.
Right?
And I would imagine that's why it's so easy and simple to fall into a political ideology or any kind of ideology
Precisely.
at all.
Precisely,
Because
because
you're essentially ramping down the intellectual capital that you have to spend on paying attention to all of the very important in-between nuances of what's really going on.
You're
just
outsourcing the thinking process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh, what do they think? Cool, that sounds good to me. I'm just going to line up with that forever.
Mhm.
That's going to be my team. That's who I play for.
And because the reason
whatever happens there, and I get to do all this other mundane stuff that I have to pay attention to.
And then the problem with engaging with something through the lens of an ideology is no longer about I'm willing to change. An ideology becomes a set of rules that it is a complete system of thought. So there can be no breaks in it, because to doubt any one part of the ideology is to bring into question all the rest of it, which is
Right.
just fine if you're actually thinking, but it's not if you have a package of ideas and you know that they're all interrelated and dependent on one another.
Right.
If you break one of those ideas, you might have to go out and shop for a new package of ideas. Or worse yet, think through, in terms of your time, think through the things individually and or like put them on this kind of purgatory where you're just like, I don't fucking know enough to know what I think about it maybe yet or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's really hard to try to, and like, try as people might, and as much time as they dedicate to that, it's really fucking tough to pay attention to everything and not want to just outsource that problem.
Well, I feel
not want to outsource that concern and this, like, because I mean, like, you know, people care about people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No matter if, like, and this is general, not everybody cares about other people. But like, hearing about atrocities that are happening in a different country, nobody likes that shit.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that
Right.
shit. That's not cool to think about.
Sure.
Because it's like, or at least in my mind, the immediate thing that I do, I hope this is a sliver of humanity that I have, but the first thing that I do, I was like, what if that was somebody I knew? How much would that affect me if that was people that I cared about?
Yes.
Instead of just strangers in numbers. You know what I mean?
But that is the human reaction to it, and the reaction that you should have. The issue is that is an ancient emotional system that was built for if you're witnessing something like that, right? And it's getting turned on by a third party account of what happened. And let's say people have the very, very best of intentions and no nefarious, like, want to give you the information factual as humanly possible. Even that has problems, and I don't think that's where we're at, unfortunately. You know, it's multiple lenses of the person that witnessed it, the person that writes it, the biases that want to be displayed that unconsciously are displayed by that person, then the biases that they may or may not be consciously displaying by that person. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like, I think my answer has been, especially lately, to be like, I just will not emotionally respond to something unless I am physically a part of the event.
Right, unless you're there and
Like,
you
I'm a
see
quarter-
all of the
like-
facets that you would want to pay attention to
Well,
in
like,
that situation.
I'm a quarter Ukrainian, and my family fled to Ukraine like before 1920. What's my opinion on Russia, Ukraine? I have zero, because I have zero confidence in any of the motivations for what's going on.
Well,
on
and
any
not only
side,
that, but it's like
from
when
what
you're
I've been
getting
told.
information third party, that shit's so insane to try to actually believe and be like, oh, this is exactly what's going on. Because that goes through the filter of it, like you said before, the filter of it happening, somebody observing it, somebody delivering that information, and then somebody else interpreting that deliverance into media.
And every one of
Let's
these,
just pretend that that's how short that chain is for a second.
Yeah.
How bad is that game of telephone going to get by the time it gets to the last party,
Yeah.
where it's broadcasted to the general public?
yeah.
It's going to get so fucking bad. It's going to get so bad. And then by the time...
Well, and then that's that. I think your model is assuming there's no manipulation, like intentional
Right.
manipulation.
Right, yeah,
Which
let's
is
go
a
and
whole-
pretend that
which is
people
a
are
whole,
benevolent
which
there.
is a whole other subject.
Yeah.
But like, regardless, the model works without any intentional manipulation. Though I believe pretty strongly that there's about at least a few, 3, 4, 5 different layers of entities that are interested in manipulating information, particularly about wars halfway across the planet. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
'Cause they
what's
want
the
you to feel
what's
some
the
type of
record
way.
on truth telling for wars to begin with? Once we look at them retroactively, not even even outside of living in this era, you know.
Written by the winners, dude. It's always written by the winners, and that's kind of a terrifying thing. I have found it very very scary because it's like the atrocities of war and combat and stuff like that. Like everybody loses in that shit. Everybody loses. People die. People lose family. Like you see gross shit and have to live with that for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? And by gross, I mean just like absolute, just grotesque violence. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you just get to bear that on your fucking chest for the rest of your days.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like nobody wins there. Sure, there may be a victor per se by who has the best resources by the end of it, but like nobody wins there.
Well, it's like, particularly the the most recent model of war that's been practiced in the 21st century. You know, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, and stuff like that. You know, there are the individual figureheads, but what it became about is like a battle of signs, of ideology, of values. You know what I mean?
That's
Because
fucking weird.
because
bro.
when you talk about the war, yeah, we'll have these figures. You know, Dwight D. Eisenhower, obviously Hitler, yada yada yada. But what it really comes down to, right, when we talk about these things, which is interesting, it's not like John Jacobson who died, you know, on Utah Beach or something like that.
Right.
It's what they stood for. It's the ideals that they stood for. You know, theoretically, right? It's the flag, liberal democracy, freaking
Right.
freedom of the individual, this and this and that. So it's like people align themselves with things that they believe are greater than themselves and are willing to, you know, die to some extent for those things. But it's like, I mean, when you put it like that, it's like, well, that's absolutely absurd. And in a sense, it absolutely is. But just calling it absurd doesn't do much for us. Like, I'm more interested in like what that's about. You know, where we're like, hey, we're gonna align ourselves with like this set of things, and it becomes greater than us. Maybe it's a way of, you know, escaping the existential question. You know,
Gives us purpose.
right. Well, it's like, hey, I won't live, and I probably won't be able to make a name for myself that history will remember. And even if I did, history might even only remembers the super important people for what, 100, 200 years or something. But
Yeah.
like, we remember the Roman Empire. We remember the temples and that the Egyptian Empire existed.
Yeah, but we remember like 5 motherfuckers. You know
Sure.
what I mean? Out of a huge number of people that lived and died during that time. And we remember, I don't know, like off the top of my head, I might be able to put together 20 names.
Sure. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm. It speaks to my point about it being not about you individually, as
Right.
wars not being about individuals per se. At least that's how they're sold. At least that's how they're framed,
They're
and how
about
they get people
ideals.
to right as battles of ideals. It always has to be bigger than like if you want people to like die and die in like droves, man, it's gotta be. We gotta have some esoteric shit going on. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we're never just like, hey, that's my boy. Let's get 10,000 people together and we're all gonna
Go
fight
save
about
my
this
boy.
one guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we'd be like, at some point we'd be like, I don't know, dude. Like maybe not.
That doesn't seem rad.
But if we're like, dude, like they hate your freedom, bro. Like, you know what I'm saying? They're coming for your kids.
They're coming for your kid. Well, it's like I scale it back often, especially seeing how countries operate sometimes. I try to scale it back, and again, to make it simpler so I can comprehend it a little bit better, is, okay, instead of a country, what about like a town? And instead of a town, what about a community? And instead of community, what about my family? Right? So that's kind of how I scale it up in my head.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It was like, what would I do for my family? Fucking almost anything.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? If there were serious threat, serious danger, something like that. And I'm not totally sure where that comes from because, again, they're just people. But maybe it's like, I don't know, a genetic recognition
Well, doesn't
when
it
it
make-
comes
I
to
mean-
like blood family, or just like you've invested a lot into an individual and you care about them very deeply. So it's like maybe time served there is why it gains value. But like people I consider family, you drop the dime, dude. I'm there with baseball bats and guns. You know what I mean? I don't give a fuck.
Well, that's certainly biological programming, and then also character to boot. But it's not bad programming. To take it back to our previous point about hearsay and telephone, like, wouldn't that make the most sense that you have the most investment emotionally or otherwise in your most direct surroundings that you can actually confirm, like, truly, that you're not imbibing third party? You know what I mean?
Makes sense.
That the most close, literal, physical reality to you is always the reality you know the most about.
Right.
And so I think that's not bad programming. It's almost certainly, to an extension, the evolutionary biologist is going to tell you 100% that that's your genes saying, hey, we need anybody that has a copy of us to survive.
Yeah,
and it is that. But also looking at it, from our telephone perspective, it's like, I don't think that that's bad programming.
But at what degree does it get back? Is like, so take that simple principle, and keep it as is sound right there, right? So it was like, if they are my family, I will do anything for them. They say jump, I'm going to say how high, right?
Right.
Because I care about them and I love them, and I
we'll
leave it at that point.
Loyalty, whatever.
Yeah, loyalty, whatever. And then scale it up to community. If I love my community, I'm willing to die for my community, right? They say something's bad, I'm going to go murder it.
Mm.
What happens when you scale that? Where's that breakdown?
Yeah.
Where do you have to start filtering more deeply and more particularly? Because when you have an entire country that is treating everybody as if it was their family, and what I'm essentially getting to is like fucking Nazi Germany, right? It was like you have an entire country of people feeling like their very way of life is being threatened. What the fuck would you do?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What would you do if you felt like your way of life was being threatened?
It's an inversion of our instincts because here's kind of what happened as far as I can tell. An evolutionary arms race took place between those who could wield technology in terms of warfare against one another and who could organize themselves in mass and wield technology in terms of warfare against one another. So it forced us to survive by putting higher and higher values on the most centralized, wide-reaching authorities so that we could mount these large forces of humanity to either defend or destroy other forces of humanity.
Right.
You know what I mean? And now maybe it's looking like through technology and ironically the threat of the atomic bomb that we might be finally in a different era where we could put that hierarchy back on its head. Maybe. But as it sits right now, we're still in this, we out of force of survival have to organize in super, super, super large groups, but on an individual level it makes us miserable the more we're identified as some just piece of a large group.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, and I feel like in something that, because like I tend to like ruminate upon this relatively often, and the more that I think about it, the more that I'm getting on the side of, I think division is dangerous. Because when you create a division of people, then it's like a little group and they have their ways of things, and then there's everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it is almost a natural course of action to be like, no, we do things better than all of the rest of everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I feel like it is a very short path to start breeding, we're better than them, they don't know what they're doing, they need to be governed by us.
Yeah.
Or they need to stop doing what they do. They need to believe the way that we do things so that they are now enlightened or part of the efficient path or whatever. And I feel like just division is such a slippery slope right into that shit.
Well, I think to me it sounds like we're talking about the process of like othering or dehumanizing another group, which inevitably happens in tribal warfare, right?
Right.
And it's like, Hitler did it. I mean, it's a huge card to play all the time. It's done almost all the time in war because it's almost necessary. Like, to have war, you need to have hate, and to have hate, you need to have anger, and you need to have disgust.
And you need to have an enemy.
You get. And to kill people, other living human beings confidently, there has to be an othering of that group or class of people. Whoever you're trying to, war propaganda. Just look to literally any country's war propaganda for any war. And whether overtly or covertly, they will be othering their enemy.
Right.
American propaganda, not excluded whatsoever. Like,
right.
Look at it. Any of it.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, and that's happened forever. You know what I mean? It was like Jesus with the church, all the way back to tribes and shit like that. You know, where it's just like this is how we believe, and you don't believe that. That makes you evil. You're a threat to me and my way of life.
Something interesting about that is that it's actually tied into our disgust response. Literally, when you get people who have like vehement hatred towards other groups of people, and you get them like talking about it and test them, it lights up the same parts of the brain of like disgust. Like if you literally stuck your hand in like gross, bloody meat water, or you like stepped on dog poop or something, it lights up that part of the brain. Disgust.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
and then
powerful, man.
and then interestingly, I made a correlation between advertising trying to do the opposite of that at all times. This almost inhumanly clean environment at all times for advertising, right? Like everything just shines, everything pops, everything's clean as fuck. Every like, you know what I mean? It's super manicured,
sterile, and just very
right.
appealing.
So I wonder if like, yeah, if that's also kind of subtly like the way that getting hatred, you have to appeal to disgust. I wonder if to get tacit approval, you appeal to like ultimate cleanliness and order and godliness in a sense. You know, I mean, someone taking it so far as to say that.
Yeah, well, it's like, and what is the current hip jive thing at the time? You know what I mean? That's the other thing that you got to appeal to, because like advertisements of 50 years ago are radically different than they are now.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
They were appealing to a different sensibility and things like that. And that, I mean, like, to take it 50 topics back, that goes back to how fickle people can be about what they're into and what they're not. You know what I mean? Like, for example, like TikTok and not all that nonsense right now. Got a huge lens. Huge lens. Everybody's looking at that shit.
Dude, have you seen the video where Theo Von and Joe Rogan go over the TikTok terms of service?
No, is it gross?
It's super gross.
This is super gross.
It should terrify anybody.
Jesus Christ. God damn it, man. I'm so glad, like, TikTok is not one of those. Like, so we say TikTok, but really what it is a formula, right? Of just little...
Dopamine hijack,
ADD fucking videos.
Right.
Where it's like, you get and this is so crazy. That you get an entire arc in 6 seconds. You're just like, what is going on? That's so nuts.
Yeah.
That's so nuts how dense we have that now.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I don't know, man. I feel like it's just it's a garbage medium.
Back to never being bored. Back to like the banishment of boredom. You know what I mean? But it's like
apathy is a crime.
Certainly, we've all imbibed in that dopamine stuff. You know, like I've had my flavors of poison with the dopamine fucking shitty apps, the Facebook and then Twitter, just trolling on 4chan and crazy bullshit like that. But what you start figuring out, what I started figuring out is that you do that and you do too much of that and you do nothing but that, and it leaves you feeling incredibly hollow. You're missing something super important that you're not getting in your life. You know what I mean? If you just are like on that train all the time.
Because it's half the product, right? It's like they figured out how to hack the dopamine receptor, whatever it is that triggers that
tells
stuff.
you got something, but you didn't actually get it.
But you didn't actually get it. You realize that after the feed is done.
Yeah. Yeah.
After you
cut
off.
Only ever subconsciously, and only ever with this like muted kind of confused self-disgust.
Right. It's like sitting down and crushing a family bag of fucking Doritos. You know, it was like, in the moment, you're like, I'm getting food because all of the things are happening. I'm taking something to my mouth, I'm chewing it, I'm digesting it, and I'm doing all the things. But then at the end of it...
mouth salt candy.
Yeah, salt candy. And then, but like, at the end of it, you see the bottom of the bag, and then you think about it, and you're just like, oh, not awesome. You know what I mean? I feel like TikTok is that, but intellectual.
It's like post-nut clarity, but with Doritos.
Post-nut clarity. It's like, oh no. Fucking post-nut clarity.
Yeah. So, totally out of left field to some extent, but we were talking about it earlier in that how complicated the world is and our tendency to pick up ideologies so that we can make sense of the world, so that we can operate in a clear, tangible type of way.
Yeah.
Hey, I need to make decisions here, so I need to know which way is up, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But I put that like, dude, our hardware is just not built for it. There's only so many things we can make sense of. And to your question earlier, at what point does the army become something you're not sure what you're fighting for? I mean, it would look like Dunbar's number is the most convincing, which is if you're not familiar with Dunbar's number, it's basically like, hey, we lived in
100,
groups of like
150 people.
yeah, of like 80 to 150 people roughly for like tens of thousands of years, and that's kind of what we can deal with and are geared to deal with, like cognitively and otherwise. You know what I mean? So I'm putting that like there's no way you're going to make sense of all the information that's out there. You absolutely have to simplify your experience, and like it's like quality over quantity. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like understand, get over FOMO. You can't know all the things, you can't do all the things, you can't be all the things, you can't see all the things, you know? But you can do a few things right, you know? And you like getting a better feel for just like what's comfortable for your biology to be in contact with, you know? Like I really think that, believe it or not, we need to be bored. We need to have time where we're literally straight up bored. And it's like at that daydreaming, okay? This like it used to just be like, oh, nobody thinks it was a bad thing that we basically done away with daydreaming, because anytime anybody would want to daydream, they pull out their phone. But I put to you that maybe it's necessary for us as human beings to have a digestion of the information and phenomena and experience that we've most recently had, and that a reflective refractory period outside of sleep that's conscious, like what was built in as a more natural part of our lives, and it's one of the very major things that we're missing with the phones, I feel like.
I would agree with that definitely. Is like I feel like there's a good a quality to digesting information and having that downtime where you get to sit and reflect. Because like I don't know about you, but like some of the scariest moments that I've had to face or things that intimidate me sometimes is just sitting by myself with my own thoughts.
Yeah.
And there are times where that idea is absolutely terrifying to me because I don't know where it's going to go. But I feel like there's enough accrued things that I have been ignoring where I was like, don't want to face the music, because if I sit with my own thoughts, it's going to be shoveling garbage through my head for a minute, right?
And it's this positive feedback loop, because it's like the less you engage with uncomfortable thoughts, the more uncomfortable they become. The less you are prone to engage with them, the more uncomfortable they become. You know what I mean?
Right. So it was like through minor suffering, intermittent minor suffering, you're dealing with a greater problem.
It seems to me like, in a simple sense, suffering is guaranteed. And you either can be in control to more of an extent over how you're going to suffer, or you can be left to the chaos of making the world, like no amount of eluding it will forsake it. There is no eluding of it. You just take the power away. You can decide your suffering, and the world can decide your suffering. And that's your choice. There is no suffering choice.
Do you think it's a better turn of phrase to be like pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional?
I see the differentiation you're trying to make there, but I really do believe that suffering itself is inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. That not only pain, but suffering.
Yeah.
But maybe it's semantics. Maybe we're kind of, defining suffering as different, because you might be kind of alluding more towards like becoming a victim or allowing yourself to become a victim in that sense. I'm not, because that's a choice that you make within suffering, but I don't necessarily see that as the same.
Okay. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, it's like, it's how you interface with it and stuff like that. There's a lot. And especially being on a particular path and figuring out how certain things go for you, and maybe to even take that scale back that I was talking about earlier from family to individual, you know what I mean? Is like, it's so easy to fall into that, oh, well, you don't do what I do, so I'm better than you. And get this weird elitist ideal for yourself, you know?
It's about it's like about validating what it is that you're doing to somebody else, because like for you, what you're doing to be good, it has to be in relation to something, right? And so it's convenient, it's lazy thinking to some extent to justify what it is that I'm doing, and like verify what it is that I'm doing, and additionally vilify somebody. Like it does two things at once. It validates myself in the way I believe, and puts somebody else into a box so I don't have to think about them.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
So I see the temptation. And we're not. The point is that we're not logical beings, and we can see this stuff and point it out all freaking day.
Not exclusively, no.
So long as we operate like we're super logical, and I find a lot of like de facto reasoning people do, where they like act and then afterwards are like, oh yeah, here's the logic of what I was doing, and you're like, was it though? You know, because
right. I was like, that seems like convenient reasoning post action.
Yeah, no, and I'm certainly guilty of it. You know, I notice these things because I notice them in myself. If I
100%, 100%. But it's like, you know, I'm sure you've been caught in this situation, but I definitely know that I have, where I'm doing some real dumb shit, and somebody's like, "Did you think that was a good idea?" And then I have that moment where I was like, "Yeah, kinda."
You're like, I must have just assigned that to low horsepower processing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I mean, back to that, it's like you only have so much horsepower, and so you're forced to see some things at low resolution. So the things that you see at the lowest resolution should be the things that you put the least amount of stock in, right? Because you just don't have enough information about the horses to be betting on them properly. You know?
Right. So what do you think the move is? Where
Simplify your experience as much as you can until have only as much in your life as you believe you can do and intake truly and fully.
Man, I feel like that would take a lot of understanding of yourself, though.
Sure.
To be able to simplify that experience down to, like, because it's got to spread across most facets of your life, right? Is to be like, I am open to the idea that I should take this for face value. Maybe not invest a lot of thought into it. Maybe not try to read between the lines. Even though there may be nuance there, maybe I shouldn't try to seek it out. Maybe I should just be like, they cut me off because they got something going on. You know what I mean? Instead of being like, oh, well, they did that to pick on me personally as an individual. They know who I am, and they know I was having a bad day, and they're making it worse, and now I want to watch them crash their car. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Well, I was thinking about this the other day, is that we often start sentences with the words "I think," and then I think that creates confusion with sentences that should really start with the words "I feel," because we're conflating those two things a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that that's bullshit, or I think that this is bullshit that you hear about, or whatever. Or how about it feels like this might be bullshit?
what do you think the difference is?
I think the difference is that once you say I think something, you begin to identify it with your ego, and it becomes to be about right and wrong. When you say feel, it appears much more open, and it is like saying, hey, this is how this affects me, but I'm aware that I'm a subjective being. Whereas I think tends to come off more like this, here's the facts, kid.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Like, it's solidified, like you've thought about it, like it's more of an intellectual experience than it would be like a fickle feeling experience.
Sure. But I think that the nature of our reality is such that almost the majority of things should be referred to as I feel about this. Because I see so many arguments started that are basically like, hey, this is what I kind of think about this issue. And then somebody immediately goes, defensive posture, oh, this is where they're coming from. Now we're going to do the tribal war. He's shown his tribe colors and decrees, and I'm going to shout back my tribe colors and decrees. Whereas I feel it puts it more like it's just so much, and maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing, but it just feels so much more to me like you can present something to somebody and they might be like, oh, okay, that's how you feel about this thing. You know what I mean?
That's a really good point, because like just playing that out in my own dome is like, I feel like that really softens the blow. You know what I mean? When you present information.
Well,
I think feels so much more solidified than, I feel that this may be a bad move, or I feel that this thought is not awesome.
And it also puts it in the proper frame for yourself as well as the listener to it. And I also mean this like more and more valid for the more topical the conversation is, or the less you know the other party. Because like between someone like a friendship like yours and ours, it's not a question. We don't have misunderstandings because you start sentences with the words I think.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying? When you have a more topical interaction with somebody, I feel can be a much more powerful way to bring across something without it seeming as pointed.
Be like, this is what it is, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm big, you're dumb, kind of thing.
Precisely.
Being more like, hey man, it's just how I feel right now.
This is my take. Well, this is my take on it. I'm not aligned with like some school of thought about it,
Right. Man, ideology is fucking crazy. So
Well, yeah,
fucking crazy what we're willing to do for the things that we think are right. You know what I mean?
well, we're that's the only thing that we're really willing to die for en masse is ideology, right? You know, like you can't like you know people used to fight wars like for the king and stuff, but like once societies got big enough and stuff, I mean, maybe I'm making a false connection here, but it feels like eventually we had to be like it's about. And the king too was about principles and values and more. It wasn't just about the king. It wasn't just about King Henry or King John.
But it wasn't an individual. It was what the idea of being a king was. It was about John Henry or fuck all.
He represented
Exactly.
the land. He
represented the land, but also like security, represented plentifulness. You know what I mean? Stuff
it's like
that.
it's so interesting because it's like look how high and evolved we are and how cool our crowns are and how tall our buildings are. We're gonna kill you guys because you don't have as cool of because you're not as evolved as us.
Right,
you don't
how
have as
crazy
cool
is
of crowns, as tall of buildings, and as fancy of knives.
Dude, what if that is like a crazy genetic thing where it was like
It's us weeding it. It's like
us weeding it out, right? It's like it's us weeding it out, being like, oh, you're weak. You're gonna make our gene pool weaker. So we gotta get rid of you.
That's definitely demonetization.
That's demonetization. That's demonetization for sure. You can't be saying that out loud.
No. I love it though. I love it. It's an interesting thought. Like, and that's not conscious. There's no ill will in that. If it's like just our genetics trying to get us to do that. So yeah, maybe that is at the end of the day the thing that's happening is that our genetics have put us into this game that was beneficial for us for thousands of years, and now we're in an entirely different environment where that game makes zero fucking sense.
Dude, what?
And we have to evolve past that game if we're going to survive.
Right. And like, what if all of this stuff that we're starting to see these days, because like in conversations we've had before, you've mentioned it was like this is the first time that we've faced an issue of plentifulness.
Yeah, affluence.
Of having too much of shit. Because all of it was before was starvation and all the time. So it was like collect resources constantly. And you see the bad outcome of that in like hoarders and things like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where they won't be without resources, so they literally mummify their cats underneath their resources that they think they're accruing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What if like all this anxiety and this severe, and it's debatable whether it's just now more focused on reported versus whether it's always happened, but what if all of the stuff that we're seeing now when it comes to like severe mental health issues and things like that is a result of a growing pain of our evolution, of realizing that we don't need to be this like do or die kind of thing anymore, that we don't need to lean into tribalism, that we don't need to do any of those things because it's like we've evolved past it. We're smarter than that now.
Well, it's kind of, dude, we've kind of put our backs to the wall. It's like get sentient or fucking die. And we've done it through technology, where the technologies continue to raise the stakes on our intelligence and ability to wield the technologies that we have, the godlike technologies that we have. And if we don't become sentient, you might as well drop an AR-15 into a chimpanzee enclosure and see what happens. You know what I mean? Like,
that's how it feels sometimes, man. Jesus.
Because then that's where we're at right now. We are the chimpanzee enclosure with the AR-15 in it, and we just haven't figured. None of the chimps have figured out yet how to fire it. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like we have to evolve. We've pressed the question through technology. Mm-hmm. You know, it's nobody's. It's by no other hand than our own.
Well, we're not divided. We have united ourselves in a way that I don't necessarily think anybody was expecting, per se. Maybe that's the thought that I'm trying to have. But it's like we've united ourselves through technology in a way that I don't think many people could have predicted.
Or that, let's say, our biology couldn't have predicted, or isn't.
That's a better way to say it. That's a much better way to say it, that our biology couldn't have predicted. Because it's like, what do we do now that I can send a message to a completely different country that has a completely different culture and everything like that? It's like, how do I even relate to that person? I don't know, but I have a medium to be able to do it. I have a medium to be able to figure it out. You know what I mean? It's not some kind of gatekeeper situation anymore where there's only this select handful of people that have traveled the world and seen things and seen what it's like. And it's like, I can get on the computer right now and see what it's like in Japan.
Well, that
and experience that culture to a small degree, of course, through a screen. I'm not there, but by the same token, I'm getting an exposure that I never would have been able to do
Right.
1,000 years ago.
Well, and I think that we're obsessed with the novelty of it, but it goes back to my I defer back to my simplify point. Until our biology evolves or we figure out how to accommodate our biology to it, this biology can only optimize at a lower threshold of information intake and interaction. You know what I mean? And it's our seeking for novelty, because novelty came at a premium in the real three-dimensional pre-technology, pre-internet world. It came at a real premium. So that was a useful instinct. But now this instinct to seek novelty is being used against you and manipulated. So, and you're not running anywhere near what you're capable of because you're too diffracted in the information that you're engaging with.
Dude, how much do you think trying to make money is poisoning all of these technologies?
Well,
and turning them into, like, and I mean, like, don't hate the player, hate the game, right? You know what I mean? Like, everybody's got to eat, everybody's got to make money and stuff like that. But how has money fucked a lot of things up?
We're gonna have this talk. All right, it goes something like this as far as I can see. The whole way that we conceive of value and interchange value sucks ass. And we have to figure out a better way of exchanging value amongst ourselves, because capitalism has shown that there are things that just cannot be run and incentivized by profit properly. Stuff like healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. And I say that not being an advocate necessarily for state healthcare, but I'm saying that purely incentivized by money, healthcare is not the best healthcare. Purely incentivized by money, scientific studies are not the best scientific studies.
Right.
We have some glaring problems with profit incentives, and you're pointing them out in terms of like the internet. And think about what the internet could be if it like embraced like truly trying to cater to the human biology and work with it and truly enlighten it and upgrade it rather than just manipulate it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, we have some major problems with that. The issue becomes, well, how do we do that? You know what I mean? Because so far it seems like the track record is so far social democracy, basically capitalism, is the best thing that we've been able to come up with, but obviously it still sucks ass. And we have all these new technologies and ways of imagining and doing things that weren't accessible before. I think we're on the brink of like a total paradigm revolution. Like, it's not going to be capitalism or communism. It's going to be something that's neither of those fucking things, I feel like. Or is like such a paradigm mind frame switch that you couldn't even begin to compare it to that. You know what I mean?
Whatever it is, it's got to be some kind of hybrid of all of the things that we've done in the past.
Well,
like
sure,
any system is.
We're already
right?
we're already a hybrid of socialism and capitalism. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So like, you can't say that we're not practicing capitalism, but you also can't say we're not practicing socialism. Like, we're already some sort of blend. You know what I mean?
Right, because I don't have to pay a fireman to put out my house.
Sure, yeah.
He's not like being like, hey, this is how much putting out your house is going to cost, so you got to cough up the cash right now. But he was like, hey, it's on fire.
Sure.
So
and,
you know
and
what
there
I mean?
may be a socialist element to the coming governments, but what I myself question is not, because the whole thing is kind of dictated like on this, like, hey, like, you have property, it's worth this much money, and then blah 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 blah. Like, socialism just says, hey, we should divide that up amongst people, and capitalism says, hey, I should get what like I earn through so many mechanisms. But I'm starting to wonder if how we even conceive of a value to begin with isn't what we really should be re-examining. Not what we do with the money that we all agree exists and represents value, but how we conceive of value to begin with might be, or other hybrid solutions. Like, for all the talk about capitalism, 90% of people in the United States work on an hourly wage. Why? That's not super capitalist. Why wouldn't they be paid in accordance with the amount that they produce?
Right.
You're just like time owning people. You just like buy them for that hour, and however much money they make for you in that hour is like, whatever, and they just get an hourly. And I'm just like spitballing, but it's like,
well, but you also filter through those people as like, who's going to be the best for that hour. You know what I mean?
Sure, but if you're the best, what if the worst worker and the best worker are a difference of 3 orders of production magnitude, and they both make the same hourly, or the other one only makes $2 more an hour? How is that incentivized in the capitalist sense, in what capitalism is supposed to be good at, which is incentivizing people to produce consumables?
That's interesting. That's an interesting question to post because it's like, yeah, it doesn't incentivize trying harder. Well, except for growth within a system, right? Like for example, if you're at a pretty average Joe job, something like that, like working in a warehouse, for example. You know what I mean? There's an idea or an ideal that if you work hard enough, then you will prove your worth and your value enough to where they want to promote you
Right.
to a higher position,
Yeah.
right? And maybe that's the carrot that we're chasing in that spectrum.
Well, what I'm saying is, I think that's kind of it's rigged with that kind of has a ton of pitfalls in it and is easy to be gamed from, particularly the employer side. I like this, like I'm just just spitballing or whatever, but I like this attaching your work directly to the value that you create because basically, the the Marx philosophy goes, hey, this guy buys all this equipment and then he has you make thousands and thousands of dollars of wealth, and then he only gives you guys your hourly share, which is maybe $200 or something like that, and
Sure.
then gets to keep the rest. And the counter argument is like, well, he has to maintain the machines, he has to do that, he's taking the risk, blah 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 blah. And I see both sides of that argument, really. And so, like, my idea is like you hit some sort of point where like the producer's just like, hey, this is how much money we take from this, but then like where basically you get to share in the wealth that you're creating directly.
I feel like that would be a system based more off percentages.
Absolutely. No, it would be a percentage-based system. But the
Yeah.
reason why we get hourlies is because, like, well, one of the reasons that they sell hourlies anyways is because it's like, at least you get a baseline minimum. What if you work somewhere and you're living paycheck to paycheck and, like, literally there's no work to be done that day or something? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, that's like almost contemplating the idea of turning everything into commission, right?
To some extent, but it's like you can have variations on it, right? Where you have a baseline wage, but then you're paid X% in relation to the amount of production that you've done.
Interesting.
And I like it also, there's upsides for the owner as well, because he only has to pay out a proportion to that much more wealth that has actually been created. And
Right.
he could maybe, you could set the terms that were satisfactory for both sides to and probably this is way harder to implement than I give it credit for, but just some thoughts.
Well, yeah, easy enough said, hard enough to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's what she said. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
But yeah, we're gonna wind it down. I think we're about pretty close to an hour right now, so
About an hour deep. That's a good size. That's a good size.
that works for me, bud.
Uh,
Talk to you later, Bob.
later, bro.